Great. Live. Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. And today is episode 59, Trust and Safety Strategies for Product Managers. And our guest today is Dario Salice, founder of ProtectYou.business. Welcome, Dario.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And our co-host today is Jaron Kemperman, Inverted PM Advocate. Welcome, Jaron.
Thank you.
And so I guess I'd like to start just by introducing the idea. And as I understand it, the idea of an inverted product is that product management is inverted because instead of focusing on making good things happen, your focus is on making bad things not happen. Dario, did I get that right? Am I on the right track?
Yeah, you're absolutely on the right track. I mean, there is really, if you think about the traditional product manager and like all those product management books about like how do you build successful products, it's always about starting with something and then making it used by more people, making more revenue, increasing certain actions, increasing engagement, or increasing subscribers or followers or people who enter a certain formula on a spreadsheet, whatever the function is that you're responsible for. And from a inverted point of view, like your own and I used to work together in the past, and then that he came up with that term. It really reflects how there's product managers and product teams who are there to reduce the prevalence of bad events happening. So it's a different approach, and we'll go into that more. Like it changes how we set our goals, how strategies are being defined, how even like performance management for product managers or product teams have to be done. And often that is not easy for organizations that are very growth oriented, very used to, oh, we want to increase the number of X, let's do Y by 5% next quarter, and another 5%, another 5%. And then there is the sometimes like party poopers like us who say, but there is also harm that is happening, and we should reduce that harm. And it's a difficult balance to find for an organization, because the good things are great, but the bad things they can overshadow a product at some point if left unhinged.
Right. And so, Dario, who are some of these bad actors that we're talking about? Maybe we could just flush out, like, if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, sure. So the thing is, I mean,
I'm sorry. I wanted to give that one to Jaron.
Yeah.
I said Dario, but of course I meant, you're supposed to know that I said Dario, but I meant Jaron. Sorry, Jaron. Jaron, who are these? You know what? We got so excited about the topic, I forgot to even have you guys introduce yourselves. Something new always happens on Identity Office Hours. So why don't we take a step back? Dario, you have the stage. Tell us a little bit about how you got here and became an inverted product manager.
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from Switzerland, where I spent the first 30 something years, worked in spaces like telecommunications and running infrastructure networks, consulting in that space. And then at some point made the switch to product management, but much more like a B2B service product management. My first role where really the responsibility was inverted ended up when I joined Google in 2016 in California, and started to work on a program that was meant to reduce account compromise for people who identify themselves as being targeted, like not the 99%, but the 1% of journalists, human rights defenders, and people who talk about their bitcoins on Reddit too much, like people who are finding themselves being targeted specifically for who they are, rather than just random pray and spray attacks. So I spent a couple of years at Google in the US, and then moved to the UK here in London to do a similar gig at Facebook. During that time, I was also member of the board of the FIDO Alliance, so I represented Facebook or Meta on the board of the FIDO Alliance. And yeah, it just was always these conversations with other PMs where the PM that was responsible to make account compromise less prevalent, or PMs to make bad content less prevalent on the platform, always were very badly understood by the PMs that wanted to make sure that the sign up funnel is more effective, or more people cross post between Facebook and Instagram. And so these conversations felt a bit alienating. And having worked with your own when I was at Google, and also with Dana Kaufman, we really started to think, well, we need to talk about something that we can, how we can really frame these conversations in a way that people understand this is what one does. So this is part of what I do these days. Like, I left Facebook 2 years ago, almost to the day, almost exactly, and to really work on something less cookie cutter. So over the last 2 years, I've been working with organizations from small startups with like 2 people or 5 people to 30 people, to large companies with, yeah, with large business or consumer spaces, on how to do identity, how to do login, how to transition to new technologies. And it always ended up to be much more of a how to help people set the right goals, how to really understand how you can be successful in this space, rather than, well, this is the technology you have to use and this is the button you have to click. All those things are rather clear to most people and easy accessible, but really understanding what are the drivers for success in a trust and safety world, that there's just not as much awareness there. And I think there's also a technology or an industry problem. Like, we all know the newest features that come with the next W3C standards, that now you can have, I don't know, related origins on passkeys, but we don't know how many accounts have been hacked on our platforms yesterday.
Right.
And
There's a lot of work to be done. So Jerome, let's quick intro before before we dive back into the topic again.
Yeah, sure. So I have a background in corporate strategy and an MBA, and then I did a startup. And then during my startup time in Barcelona, one of my investors got hacked, and I remember him calling me one day and sending me an email in a foreign language where we normally email in English. And so I called him up and I said, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm hacked and it's horrible, and the attackers have deleted all his accounts." And luckily he was old school, so he had a printout of all his contacts, and so his assistant retyped all the contacts back into the account, which is not a Google account, by the way. And then I had to close my startup, and I joined Google. And then the team that needed a PM, their first PM, was what they called back then the hijacking team in Zurich. And so I was so excited because I could start helping people like my investor that got attacked and got their account hijacked. And I've had the privilege to journey with some of them. I know a friend who's a teacher whose classmates or whose students hijacked her account, and then she couldn't teach anymore, and the school didn't support her, so she had to leave the profession. So the world lost an amazing teacher. I've worked with the same folks that Dario, talked about, and the slogan I have for my team is, it's saving one is worth it. And I've been doing it now for 8 years, the first 5 years in the consumer space, so all Google accounts, and the last 3 years I've been responsible for all our commercial Google accounts. So if you pay for your Google account and you sign in, you go across the desk, well, not literally, but you go through my team, and we try to stop those criminals that want to go after your account from getting in. And during my journey, as I started reflecting on, why is it also different for me? When I would talk to other PMs, they would have different types of metrics and different stories, and their performance reviews would have different things in them. And then I realized, for us, PMs that are in security, anti-abuse, also quality, or like infra, success is when nothing happens. If nothing happens, that our work is successful. You get to do your day. You don't get interrupted. Your server stays up. Your platform is clean. If that is the case, then that's when we're successful. But wait, if that's the case, and we don't really know what's really out there as badness, then everything is kind of weird. Everything's inverted. And that's when we came up with this idea of the inverted product manager, or inverted product spaces, where you work on something that is not like driving a line up, it's driving a line down or keeping it low. And then I started, I was like, we need to talk about this, and we need to give this type of product person a place in the world, because they're very often underappreciated, not ideally managed, and they just have different challenges, and it's hard to find people that are like-minded to talk about these challenges. So I reached out to Dario, who I used to work with. I reached out to Dana Kaufman, who used to do similar work for Microsoft. And we put our heads together and we started a little LinkedIn group. We started blogging, and that's how the inverted PM became a term. And I'm very happy to do that still today at Google. And very proud that saving one is still worth it.
And there's a link on the homework. Each episode has a wiki page, and there in the homework there's a link to Dana's initial post, which was very helpful for me to understand the context. Let's finally get back. So inverted product managers are about preventing harm, is primary. And who are these bad actors? The question I tried to ask you like 5 minutes ago. Just a quick idea of the range of who these bad actors are. I think most people, our audience probably knows, but I'd love to hear that from your perspective.
Yeah, when I think about inverted product managers, I don't just think about people that work on security or abuse. I also think about people that work on ML quality, machine learning quality, or infrastructure uptime, right? And when I think about bad actors, I try to figure out what is the critical journey that someone or something has to go through in order to do the badness or cause the badness that they want to do. And so in case of account compromise, this could be individuals trying to go after an organization or a person. There could be abusers that are just trying to make money off schemes. But in the case of, for example, infra, it just could be a weather anomaly that takes a server down, right? That can also be something you have to prevent. That's also an inverted PM's job. Or in case of machine learning, it might be a bad data set that trains a model wrong. So it's anything, whether human or not human, that can cause the badness that you've defined that you want to stop, the negative effects that you want to stop. It's everything. It's anything that can cause something to happen, so you don't hit your success anymore, right? So that is kind of how I would describe
that is broader than I had originally thought of it.
Yeah, so that's what most people say. Yeah, but it's very important that to recognize that it's, of course, it's very easy when you talk about an inverted PM to immediately think about security, but there's a much bigger group of people that face the same challenges in managing their area, that are also inverted, that are not directly into core security. So we should not exclude those and not forget those.
So Dario, how do we measure success for this type of market? I imagine for a traditional product, we want to see it massively adopted, but in this case, success is somewhat different. So what challenges does that bring, and how do you actually measure success for an inverted product?
Well, we measure the inverted part. Like as Jeroen mentioned, we want to prevent certain things. Either we want to prevent accounts getting compromised by bad actors. We want to prevent bad content being shared by people, and sometimes good people mean well and they end up sharing bad content. So it's not always somebody with bad intentions that does something, or the invalid data set that's getting imported into a machine learning pipeline and then leading to false results. So the difficult part, and it sounds very easy, but really the difficult part is identify what is the harm that we want to prevent. And let's maybe, because this is an identity community, we take account compromise as a harm, as the harm we want to prevent. Like, how do you recognize account compromise? Well, one way you can recognize account compromise is obviously if you're an IT help desk and Joe and Jane come and say my account has been hacked, but that is probably only a very small percentage of the cases. So you start to have to create measurement ways to detect how likely is each account compromised at any given point. And once you have that, it's never a perfect science. It's always an evolving goalpost to recognize that. And so you're setting those things as goals. You're perception on how many accounts do you think, or how much harm do you think has taken place on a specific platform or in your product, and you reduce that. So your goal is not to increase a metric or to make it go to zero. Your goal is to just reduce it as much as you can, without destroying all of the other goals, because we're inverted product managers. So that means we're probably going to make some goals for a different product manager slightly harder to reach, because adding friction is always going to have an impact, can have an impact on growth or engagement or other metrics. So the really difficult part is, sets the goal, identify what is the harm I can do and how much can I reduce that harm, and then how can I do that in a way that it doesn't disrupt the business completely and I'm being shut down, because it's a trade-off to be made. So those are the frameworks that I think are very different for inverted PMs when it comes to setting goals.
So, Jaron, if you're setting a new framework for the leadership to think about things, how does that impact how you talk to the stakeholders and get them to think about it and buy into this idea?
Yeah, so I think when you are an inverted PM, you have to do a lot of storytelling and a lot of explanation. I'm very fortunate that where I work, my leadership chain is really, really aware and convinced of the importance of my area and also the impact that my team and I are having. But when you have an inverted PM that is in a less sort of developed organization where there needs to be some education, you need to do a lot of storytelling. And for example, one of the things we just talked about was success criteria. When you have a metric that says so many accounts were compromised each day, and that metric goes up, it doesn't necessarily mean you did a bad job, because maybe you're just detecting more, right? Which actually means you did a bad job before and now you're doing a better job. And so an executive might come and say, hey, I give you these resources, but now this line is going up. What's going on, right? Or the other way, the inverse is also true. Because you don't know the real amount of bad stuff out there, we call this the concept of the invisible line. It might be that your detected badness goes down and you celebrate, but the bad actors basically just went into new places that you're not looking in yet. So when you're talking about these types of things, you have to really say, hey, here's the metric and this is the story that goes with it. Yes, it's going up, but it's because we launched a new model that detects more, right? Or yes, it went down, but we have to be sure or yes, it went down, but we'll have to wait for a little while to see if it goes back up because people are finding a way around what we launched. And this storytelling you need to do all the time until your entire context is aware of what's happening in your business. And I use examples a lot, like my investor or my teacher friend who the world lost an amazing teacher because of this account, right, that got compromised. Because one of the amazing things about our areas as inverted PMs is not only do we get to ship awesome products, they're also extremely meaningful to people because they really prevent an amazing amount of badness from happening to a person. They prevent a person from being ashamed, from losing their money, from stress. And so for me, it's really this amazing intersection of launching products that are great, but also have a lot of meaning in the world. And I'm really proud about that. But you need to tell that story to your executives as well.
Dario, Jaron mentioned this idea of an invisible line. Maybe you could flesh that out a little bit. What did he mean exactly?
Yeah, so you have, I think the account compromise is a really good example, again, because it's not, an account compromise is not all, it doesn't always manifest in the same way. Not all accounts are being compromised with the same methods. And if it could be, if all account compromise attempts could be detected, then it wouldn't be a problem. So you need to have an understanding of how often do accounts on your platform get successfully compromised. So that invisible line is a task in itself. And I mean, in our environments where Jeroen and I worked, and like later I said, Facebook, we had teams that worked, that whose task was to make that invisible line semi-visible, like to come up with measurement ways, detection mechanisms to figure out, well, how much harm happens on this platform, not in order to just block it, but in order to define what is the magnitude of the problem that you need to fight with. So it is a discipline in itself, which not all organizations have the capabilities to fund, but it's the inverted version of the sales director saying we have to make more revenue next year because we know from the CFO how much revenue we made this year, but who knows how much harm has happened. So you almost need like this harm team that detects how much of the activity that we don't want is even happening on our platform. Some of it is adversarially driven, some of them is technically driven because of things that go wrong or things that are not like imperfection of technology in nature in general. But you need to have a discipline that really looks at what is happening on our platform that we don't want to be happening, and that in itself is a job, is a category of duties and responsibilities. So that invisible line, in order for it not to be completely invisible anymore, or not to be just a shot in the dark, you need to focus on it and figure out as much as you can. And as Jeroen said before, sometimes you find harm that you haven't found out before. And while at first sight that seems like a loss, that now we have more harm than we had last month, it is a successful improvement of the visibility of that invisible line, or the understanding of the harm that is happening on the platform.
So some of these challenges around metrics, would they lead an inverted product manager to perhaps roll out a product in a different way to maybe better understand the impact on that invisible line?
Yeah, I will take that one. It's definitely right. For us, it's really important to do A/B testing, because then at least we can see the difference between how something performs in one group versus another. But even then, if you say we launched something and it reduced account takeover by so much percent, it could be that 2-3 months from now that sort of has evaporated because the attackers or the people that are posting images or videos, they found different ways to slightly modify their content or to post in different ways. And so it evaporates over time. So even then, even if you can say, I launched these features, the amount of badness has gone down by, I don't know, 50%, you still have to tell the story, because a year from now, that 50% might have evaporated because new technologies, changes. And the invisible line for the PM is also maybe more a bit like a market size for a salesperson would be. Like how many possible things could be going out there. And then you try to estimate how close are you. And some moments you find you're really close, and then other moments you get a reminder that actually you're far away. And you try to make sure that if this is the visible badness and this is the invisible badness, you try to close the gap as much as possible. What Dario was saying, you try to identify, make it visible, and then close the gap.
So it sounds like we're saying that we want this control group. We're going to introduce this new feature. Instead of rolling it out to everybody, we need to know if it works. So we're going to roll out this new feature, which makes you safer, into this smaller group, which means that there's a group that you know about that's still exposed to this harm. So Dario, I'm wondering, are there ever any ethical considerations, and how do you weigh that versus whether on how you should roll out this new feature?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good. It's a really good question. Like, what are the drawbacks, or what are the consequences of this? And yeah, I think longer term there is always these ethical considerations. Like if I knowingly hold back on something that could help a certain audience from being attacked, then I have to accept a certain amount of harm. And I think it really depends on the type of problems you're dealing with. That is more of or less of a problem. Like it always depends on the gravity of the harm that you want to prevent. Like there's certainly a difference between fake Ray-Ban glasses being posted to non-consensual sexual imagery being posted. So like the harm is not the same. And I think in my experience that also impacts on how you're doing these control groups. The bigger the group is that you're trying to protect, the less the easier you can deal with control groups, because the attackers are likely going to change behavior before they're changing audience. But if you're dealing with a smaller audience or a smaller attack vector, there can be drawbacks of having holdout groups, because then the attackers are going to invest more money to just find those holdout groups over time. So I think most teams try to keep them as short term as possible. And I've been in situations where we decided not to have holdout groups because we just knew that the risk is so imminent that just in order to know something that we know is going to be better, we didn't want to take the risk of having people being compromised in that short time. But to what Jeroen says, it comes back to the storytelling. It comes back to the strategy that you define as a team, where you say, what is the harm you want to fight against, and then some harm you fight and you justify it with the improvement with the holdout group, and in some harm you just need to eliminate before it even can happen in a more deterministic way, and then you need to justify that as a much more drastic measure to protect the company's interest and the customer's interest. So it takes a lot of talking, it takes a lot of communication, and there's no one size fits all. But it is always something that teams need to consider, is like, well, what is the cost of being able to measure harm over to prevent it, and then lose some of the visibility, which is clearly can be a drawback, can lead you into a road where you start to rely too much on a metric of something that hasn't happened, but you just don't see it anymore.
Right. So Jeroen, you had mentioned previously in our conversation before the live stream started about that you had a definition of personas. And here in the identity space, we tend to use the same words for like 10 different things. So I thought it might be interesting if you help flush out in the inverted product manager space, how are you using the term persona?
Okay. So I think personas, a normal product manager would have one persona, which is like the user they're targeting, right? They can have sub, they can have like they can have, demographically split sub personas or geographically split sub personas. But there's the user is generally the persona that a normal product manager, if that even exists, because every product manager I think is quite unique, but a normal non-inverted one has the user. In our case, we have the user and we often have the abuser, right? Those are two different people, and they're kind of in a marketplace together, because the abuser is trying to get to the user's stuff, either by compromising the account or by injecting a fake video that they then get to see, or by, I don't know, compromising something else or taking something down. So the abuser is trying to get to the user, and it's almost like a marketplace. And rather than normal PMs in a marketplace that try to boost transaction, we are trying to disrupt transactions. We're trying to prevent these two user personas from getting together and getting into a transaction without the user even noticing, right? Success is when nothing happens to this person. So that means in practice, we have to think about certain flows. I call those critical attacker journeys. And a critical attacker journey for a persona could be, I break into an account in order to extract the user's contacts, right? And so I have to go through login, I have to go to the contacts page, I have to click the button, and then I get the contacts. And then I, as an attacker, have it. But the real user could also be doing this journey. So how do we prevent this transaction from happening where the abuser gets to the contacts of the user? But if it happens to be the user, we don't. And that's where really smart product decisions and techniques come in. In our case, we introduced risk-based re-authentication, where if someone tries to download contacts, we do an additional risk assessment that's a bit more strict, because if we get it wrong, we just prevent the contacts download. We don't lock you out of your account. But if we get it right, then we stop the attacker right there. And so this is how I'm trying to think about personas. It's like a marketplace where you're trying to prevent transactions without one of them even noticing that this is a marketplace, right? They're just on their own. I'm not sure, Dario, if you have any additional thoughts about this.
Yeah, I think just with the risk of repeating what you said, I think it's really this ecosystem of attackers and defense. And one of the things, as you say, we build things that ideally nobody sees, or no one will ever have to show. Like some of the user experiences that are there, some of the friction points, ideally only the attackers would see them.
Yeah.
Like if in a perfect world where we would detect all of the bad actions with 100% preciseness, only the attacker would see the like the speed block, or the bump, the speed bump, or the blocker that is implemented in that product. But because we know it's not always that case, like sometimes these interstitials are being presented to the good people, to the people who are legitimate trying to do something. So they also have to be built in a way that they can solve them, that they can resolve them within a reasonable way. And so so I think
that's interesting because when we build features, we try to block the abuser, but we design it for the user because we want them to have a good experience. And when you think about a marketplace, and this is, I think, really relevant for the Identerati office hours, is that in my case, there's a third persona in there, which is the admin, right? And so the admin is a really great partner for me because I can give admins tools to say, I want to raise the bar above the baseline. So now not only do I build features for the user to block the abuser, but I also need to build features that allow the admin to move them and tailor them, because the admin knows their own users best. You as identity professionals and architects, you know your user base better than I do. So I need to provide you with tools like passkeys or other things that you can deploy to say, you know what, for my organization, the bar is here. And I'm accepting these many help desk calls in favor of this security posture. And so that's actually a third persona that's in there. And then there's another, the persona that is the decision maker who actually pays the bill. And that's very often not the same as the admin. So there's a lot of stuff in there. But I think that first triangle of user, abuser, and then the admin that is a bit in between, I think that's a really interesting triangle to think about.
And I guess there's a trade-off. And Dario, maybe you could talk about the trade-off. Is you could make it totally secure by having everyone never talk. And then, but so what are maybe some of the business trade-offs that you have to talk about or consider for this type of product management?
Yeah, I mean, like in order to make, for example, an email account or any online account completely secure, you just prevent anyone from logging in, and which means no bad actor logs in. Success check, and we're all going on a nice island on vacation. But if your business depends on people being able to sign into a product and use that product and use that service, there could be whatever type of, from e-commerce to social media to communication to productivity, then you have to allow people to use that. And so with that, you're always going to also have the risk that somebody's going to abuse the entry point. I mean, like, we're talking here to an identity crowd, and I mean, the passwords are such a good example. Like, yes, having an easy to guess password is really bad for security, but it makes it so much easier for somebody to remember it and to log in. So where do you set that line? Like, how do you define what is easy enough to get in? Like, how many of the good people are actually succeeding into getting into their account because they don't have a 55-digit passwords to enter every 15 minutes, versus how many people who should not get in are going in. And so, like, you have to have both metrics. You have to understand both of those user journeys or both of those attacker journeys, and being able to quantify them, and then really make a decision. And then how much do you need to tighten one or the other side to achieve your business goals. And well, we come back to how things are being launched. Like you then have to start to test. Well, if I force my users to have a stronger password, how many of the good users will then fail to log in, versus how many of the attackers will not be able to to compromise the accounts anymore. And it goes with all of the things we do in this space. Like obviously I'd like everything to have two-factor authentication, but two-factor authentication again is a friction point that will prevent many bad actors from compromising accounts, but it will also prevent a non-zero number of good actors from doing what they're supposed to do. So the difficulty of the trade-off there is really to understand the harm that you can reduce, but also the potentially negative impact it can have on the good metrics that you have. And it's a conflicting situation. And as a inverted product manager, that puts many of us often in almost adversarial positions within organizations. And then if the leadership doesn't have a framework on how to justify those trade-offs, I see more often than not, sadly, it's on the shoulder of the inverted PM that then has to justify. And I think that's part of the reason why we see quite a bit of fluctuation or attrition in these types of jobs. Didn't want to paint such a dark message, but yeah.
Can I respond? So I think the solution to this is to have a menu of options, which is one of the next things we'll talk about in the inverted space. Because the core of an inverted PM is something comes in front of us, and we have to decide, do we let this go or do we not let this go? And if I have only one tool to intervene on this thing, which is like block the whole account, then I have to be very, very careful when I use that, right? It's the same with Darius. If I have only one tool, which is signing in every 15 minutes, then it becomes really hard. But if I have a whole box of tools, which have different trade-offs, some things are a lot of friction, like turning the account off. Some things are a little friction, just a little notification, there's no friction, right? Or just pressing yes on the screen, or maybe doing something. If I have a whole menu of options, then I can be much more granular and tailored in how I intervene. And so, for example, you should think about this as a two-dimensional space. On the one axis is how bad is it, what is about to happen, if it is actually bad, right? How bad it is and how sure are we that this is bad. And on the horizontal axis is like how much friction does it cause. So if we're very sure that what's happening is really bad, and we're very sure that it is actually bad, then we can do a super high friction thing, which is take down the account. If we think the badness might not be so big, maybe a Gmail search or like maybe a browsing of some content, and we're also not very sure, then we should do a low friction intervention like a notification. And in the middle, you see things like signing out one session or poisoning one cookie or re-authenticating. And when you have this menu of options, the more granular you are, the more often you can have an answer for the question, what should we do? And I think that is what we should build to solve this business trade-off.
Dario, I'm going to throw a left field question about you at you, and you might not know the answer to this. But a lot of this, as a product manager, it seems like you can express these policies, and these policies might be very nuanced, because you're really trying to control security by looking at a lot of data and coming to some very nuanced decisions about when to try and add friction. And I'm curious if you think that now when the application developers actually get this, they have to integrate somehow these policy decisions that the inverted product managers very carefully and scientifically have tried to derive. But I'm wondering if there's friction sometimes with the developer teams on being able to implement these types of policies that you think would be ideal to achieve that ideal trade-off of the friction versus usability.
Yeah, I mean the short answer is yes. Like this friction can happen on a regular basis, because there's the more nuanced certain policies are, the more effort it can be to implement them. And then there's always the friction between engineering resources. How much do you want to invest in fixing the problem, or how sophisticated does the solution have to be in order to be good enough? So there's always a level of, or often a level of compromise that need to be made. It's like nuanced policies can be great on paper, but then they can really cause a lot of effort in implementing, and can be harder to operationalize. And then there's also like the risk that you then lose control on what is actually happening is bigger. So it's a very healthy tension, I think, between the inverted product managers who wants to resolve the problem to as much as possible, but also like the reality of the engineering limitations and the system limitations. Like sometimes you don't have certain data available to make certain decisions, or you don't have it in a quality that's good enough that every decision is perfect, or you don't retain data as long enough to make certain decisions. So it is always a trade-off, and these policies. I think a good policy is not complicated. A good policy has to be very, very specific and clear, and rather than too nuanced.
And so let's go to last thoughts. We like to keep these to 45 minutes. And Jaron, how about you first? Any last thoughts? Any takeaways or things you'd like to share with the audience?
No, thanks for tuning in today. It's always exciting to talk about inverted PMs. And thank you if you are fighting the good fight. Remember that saving one person from this horrible experience is worth it, right? That's why I get out of bed every day. That's why my team does what it does. And if you work with inverted products or inverted product managers, just remember that the normal rules might not necessarily apply. You've heard us talk about the invisible line, about setting strategies, metrics, personas. And so we should have high standards, but they might have to be a bit different, but still high for our inverted PMs or inverted product owners or inverted products around us. But just remember, saving one is worth it, because that's the most important thing. That's why we do our work.
Awesome. Dario, last thoughts?
Yeah, I think really keeping in mind that the problem space that inverted product managers are solving is not one of those problems that you can solve and then move on and dedicate your attention to something else. Like in most cases it's an adversarial space, and like even if we consider bad weather an adversarial impact on the ability to run a system or run a product, it doesn't have to be a hacker. It's never going to go away. Like the problems that inverted product managers solve, they're not just going to disappear from one day to the other. So it is really important to stay vigilant and to acknowledge that attackers will change their behaviors. If you introduce a new security protection to prevent account compromise or to prevent injections of bad data into your system, if you have motivated attackers, mainly financially motivated attackers, they will, the moment their old methods doesn't work anymore, they will try to find a new method. So it's a problem space that it's not about throwing as many resources at it as possible to solve the problem and then being able to focus on something else, but it's something that really requires the continuous attention. And sometimes that makes it taxing, because it's not a problem you solve, it's just a problem you're trying to reduce until the attacker finds something else, and then you go at it again. That
Right.
will be my last to a few words. Really, it's a continuous problem that needs continuous attention.
And these days with advances in AI and deep fakes, and I would say it's almost like I feel that attackers are geometrically rather than algorithmically progressing in their ability to more effectively attack. So yeah, thank you guys, because the work you're doing is super important and just getting even harder. So next week, I want to announce. So next week, I'm taking a break because I'm speaking at a conference, All Things Open, in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a great open source conference. If anyone's in the Raleigh metro area, please join us. And then next week is also Internet Identity Workshop, which I understand Dario has attended at least once. This is a twice a year industry conference that goes on it's been going on for 15 years plus, where we sort of collaborate as an industry. If you're able to attend in Mountain View, it's a fantastic event, and it's not a sales marketing event. It's an engineering collaboration event where we can share ideas and best practices and come up with new standards. And it's a marathon, but it's fun. So next week, I don't think I might do an unofficial live stream of a session or something, but the next time we'll come back will be the week after, which is November 5th. And Yuri Ackerman, who's who used to work for the FIDO Alliance, wrote a blog called Reflecting on FIDO's Evolution to Passkeys, because there has been an evolution from old style security keys like this to now passkeys that we use on our that are synced sort of like in a password manager. So a lot has happened, and Yuri Ackerman has a great perspective on that. He wrote this blog, and we're going to talk to him about it. So please join us on November 5th. And thank you very much, Dario and Jeroen, for joining us. Thank you, audience, and we'll see you in November.
Well, thank you for having me.